Very, very good evening to all of you. On behalf of the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy and, of course, OP Jindal Global University, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our very distinguished speaker for the evening, Dr. Srivatsa Krishna, a distinguished Indian Administrative Service officer who is currently serving as the Principal Secretary to the Government of Karnataka. This moment is also very important because we are indeed inaugurating uh, the Dr. B.R. Shenoy Memorial Lecture, and I'm very delighted that Dr. Krishna will be delivering the inaugural lecture. And I'm going to request shortly after my reflections, Professor Sudarshan to talk a bit about the work and contribution of Dr. Shenoy himself. I also want to take this moment to especially thank Dr. Srivatsa Krishna for taking time and effort to be here. But most importantly, I should mention to all of you that nearly 4 days ago he became terribly unwell, and it was almost close to his trip being cancelled. But because of his deep conviction to the promise that he made, but also his deep interest to engage with academic institutions, he decided to travel from Bengaluru to Delhi and now from Delhi to campus. So I want to express my heartfelt gratitude and deep appreciation to Dr. Krishna for his presence here. I don't want to read his biographical information. You can see that Dr. Srivatsa Krishna has straddled across multiple worlds, including the world of private sector, academia, governance, and of course policy making, and the work of a public intellectual. He's a very distinguished scholar, teacher, researcher, and of course a public policy practitioner. Another remarkable aspect of Dr. Srivatsa Krishna is the fact that he has made immense contribution to improving the quality of governance in the various jobs that he had undertaken in while serving in different capacities in different governments. While he was, of course, a topper of the Indian Administrative Service, which in itself is of great importance. But beyond that, I must say that we do meet a lot of officers belonging to his tribe, but not all of them belong to that type of intellectual standards as well as deep commitment to both institution building and nation building, but also the type of commitment and dedication to the cause of transformation of societies through the work of the government itself. Dr. Srivatsa Krishna deeply believes in the role of the government and how government can be an agent of positive change and how collective consciousness could be built around the possibility of all actors, including the private sector, can contribute to that change. We are very fortunate that he has observed us from distance for a very long time. I must say that it has taken 13 years for us to persuade him to come here, and I hope that the next visit is not going to take that long. I can only hope that his association with our university will be more substantial and the possibility for him to not only teach at Stanford and other institutions around the world, but also to contribute and teach in institutions in India becomes important, and our students and faculty get the benefit of his presence. I want to quickly mention that one of the things that the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy has attempted to do and has been at the pioneer of it is to bridge the gap between theory and practice. A lot of it is done through the work of its own scholars and researchers and the teachers in the school itself. But part of the work is also undertaken by the opportunity for bringing outstanding individuals to have deliver lectures and speak in conferences and other such events in the school itself. Today is one such opportunity, and we are very delighted that we will be having Dr. Srivatsa Krishna delivering the lecture on a theme that I believe all of us will be keen to look at: India at 2047, the road to a developed Bharat. This idea of development is obviously so contested in academic institutions, and in particular, everything is contested. But the notions of what constitutes development, for whose development, what is the nature of development that is going to impact the life of individuals, and how do you benchmark that development itself, all these are important questions that the very title has raised, and I'm sure Dr. Krishna will reflect on several aspects of that question itself. With those words, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude and appreciation to Dr. Srivatsa Krishnan, and also to thank him for all the wonderful work that he is doing, believing in the possibility of government to make change and to internally work towards improving the quality of governance while being in the government. Thank you very much. And I now invite Professor Sudarshan, Dean of the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, to share some of his introductory remarks, including a bit of the contribution of Dr. Shenoy himself. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor. So, on behalf of the Vice Chancellor and the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, a great pleasure in welcoming Dr. Srivatsa Krishna to deliver the inaugural lecture in memory of Dr. B.R. Shenoy. Now, Dr. Shenoy's name is not commonplace and has not been for a very long time. And this has to do with, trends in ideological beliefs. And he is he was an outstanding economist, but forgotten. And I think it's important as an institution that we should remember the contributions of people with different perspectives. Now, it could be claimed that if Professor Shenoy's advice to the government of India had been taken, the trajectory of India's development might have been very different. That's not to say that, the people who were responsible for the trajectory of India were wrong in their beliefs, but it's a case of how certain viewpoints tend to get overlooked. And, while currently we may say, oh, there's a disturbing trend where people of a certain persuasion, whether it's ideological in economic terms or culturally, are given prominence and leadership positions. It's always been like that. So when the Planning Commission was started, the economists of that time were greatly enamored by the Soviet Union. It's not just the people at that time, even in the London School of Economics, where Professor Shenoy studied, Sidney and Beatrice Webb, the Fabian socialists, were enamored by the achievements of the Soviet Union and wrote paeans of praise for that. And countries coming out of colonial rule on the whole, all over the world, were inclined to take a leaf from a rapidly industrializing economy such as the Soviet Union and try to develop models for their plans and planned growth. So that was an overwhelming belief that that's the path to take. And then you had an iconoclastic economist, sincere to his discipline, who said, no, this is not quite right. And that was Dr. Shenoy. He was a pupil of Hayek in the London School of Economics. But those were times when you went to Cambridge and you had studied with John Maynard Keynes or Joan Robinson, you counted. Hayek, the Austrian school of economists, was thought of as somewhat, off the mark. But Dr. Shenoy was courageous and persisted in writing and contributing his views. And he produced, he was critical of the plans and the idea that, you could determine in advance a rate of growth and then say, now, what are we going to do to achieve this rate of growth? His view was first determine what resources have you got. Cut your coat according to your cloth. Now that's good common sense advice, but that was marginalized. So I think it's time when we are probably at a stage where it's neither the model of the Soviet Union or versions of neoliberalism, which believes that the market is everything, and there should be an absolutely minimalist state that leaves everything to the market, because the market is colorblind, it doesn't discriminate. So you have these binary views, and I think we have to discover, given the state of the world now, something that is not one or the other of these binaries. We've got to figure out how it is that the state is important and the market also is important, and the interplay of the state and the market, we should get it right. So in that sense, I think reading the contributions of Professor Shenoy would be very illuminating for us going forward. There was a kind of a deliberate suppression of his views. Milton Friedman came and produced a hard-hitting critique of this idea of plan models in the country. He did it for the Planning Commission, but that wasn't released by the Planning Commission as an official document for a very long time. And so you can see that some of these ideological biases can come into play. And as a university, we have to rid ourselves of all such ideological biases and provide a platform for different kinds of views. And it's particularly appropriate that we have Dr. Srivatsa Krishna deliver the inaugural lecture in memory of Dr. B.R. Shenoy, because he's the kind of person who has, in his professional life, serving the Indian Administrative Service, demonstrated that, it's not, as Deng Xiaoping said, it doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white as long as it can catch mice. That kind of common sense. And we just had a lively discussion with Professor Robert Smith visiting us from Australia, who talked about how, the civil service and the people in India's civil service who actually solve problems. I mean, they are bureaucrats, but they are not enmeshed in bureaucracy. And that's the kind of person Dr. Krishna is. And so it's befitting that we have him deliver the inaugural lecture in memory of Dr. Belikoth Raghunath Shenoy. Thank you.
Professor Rajkumar, Sri Sudarshan, distinguished members on the dais, faculty members and students. It's a great privilege to be here to deliver the inaugural Shenoy Memorial Lecture. As Sudarshan rightly pointed out, if we had followed the guidance of B.R. Shenoy, maybe India would have taken a different path from what it did. He was against import substitution. He was against government intervention because he thought it would lead to a lot of, the license Raj would lead to a lot of corruption. And all of that happened as we saw. And if you read Milton Friedman's comment on the dissent note written by B.R. Shenoy, many years later, he critiqued the Nehruvian plan in 1953, the second five-year plan. And when Milton Friedman commented on it, he said, "It looks like I'm reading a report on the five-year plan and not a prediction of it. It was that accurate." So it's a great honor to be here. I share the privilege of working in the state he was born in, and also having worked in two institutions where he served, namely Government of India and the World Bank. At the outset, I'll be failing in my duty if I don't thank Dr. Rajkumar, who's been persistently calling me here, and I was finally able to make it thanks to him. And what a wonderful campus you have. And I'm not saying this because he's here, but very few people can create this kind of institution in 14 years, ground up. Please look around you and see how many such institutions do you have. You have an Ashoka, you have a Jindal, and you have maybe one or two others who started and did this in 13 years, and all credit to Rajkumar's leadership and vision, and of course, Mr. Jindal's support for making this happen. You know, what is interesting is people like Rajkumar and Ashish Dhawan could go anywhere in the world and do whatever they want, right? They were top. He went to Oxford. He's a Rhodes Scholar, went to Harvard, and he chose to come back to Sonipat. He could have gone anywhere in the world. He need not do what he's doing. Yet he chose to come back to Sonipat, give his time, vision, leadership, and resources to build this fabulous institution that you have. I think that is really the true sign of a great leader, and I'm delighted to be here today. So India at 2047, the contours of what we call a Viksit Bharat, a true Tamilian. I'm a Tamilian who grew up in Delhi. He's a true Tamilian who grew up in Chennai, and he asked me, what is this Viksit? So I had to explain to him, Viksit means developed and prosperous. So what is the road to a Viksit Bharat? And why do I believe that we are at a decisive moment in history? 70 years, our country, 67, 68 years, ran one way. We are now at an inflection point, at a transformational point, whether we recognize it or not. Something akin to the Meiji Restoration in Japan, something akin to the Berlin Wall falling. And India is on the verge of a takeoff, and I will tell you why. Now, if you look at our history, we took 67 years to reach our first trillion of GDP, 7 years to reach the second trillion, 3 years to reach the third trillion. And by all accounts, in the next 9 years, we will become a $9 trillion economy. And in 2047, which is 100 years since our independence, we would have become a 25 or a $26 trillion economy. Think about it. In 1600s, India had 24% of the global GDP. In 1800s, it was down to 16%. At the time of independence, we were at 5% of the global GDP. From 1700 down to 1947, a period of 250 years, saw our GDP drop from 24% of the global average, of the global share, to down to 5%. In 2020, we are at approximately 9% of the global GDP. The Indian flywheel has begun to spin again, and that is good news for all of us. Let me give you some interesting data points, some of which you might be aware of, some of which you may not. In 1990, India's per capita income was higher than China's. We were at $368. China was at $318. In 2022, China is at $12,000 per capita income, and India is at $2,300. If you see China's journey, once the per capita income crosses $3,000 or $3,500, it's a rocket ship going up. There is absolutely no reason to believe that India will not have a similar journey going forward. By today already, 65% of our population is below 35. That's a data point everyone knows. Let me give you another data point which very few people know. By 2030, we will have 1 billion working population, which is more than the combined population of the G8 countries. We'll have 1 billion working population, more than the combined population of the entire G8. People often talk about inequality in India, and indeed inequality is there in India. If you account for the various subsidies and transfers that India gives, most of the services to the poor are subsidized. Many are free. If you account for these subsidies, our Gini coefficient is 29, as compared to a global average of 67 and an OECD average of 31. We are actually less unequal than the global average, than the OECD average, if you account for the transfers going to the poor. Today, about 9 lakh crores, or 3.5% of our GDP, is spent on transfers and subsidies. And that is the reason why the Gini coefficient of India is low. Now, all of you saw the, this is an aside, all of you saw the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank, right? How many of you know the Silicon Valley Bank, and this is a reflection on our global rating agencies, the Silicon Valley Bank was rated at Baa1. India is rated at Baa3. lower than the Silicon Valley Bank. But it was the Silicon Valley Bank which collapsed, which should tell you how much to believe our global rating agencies. You should believe them with a bag of salt. Let me come to some other interesting data points which you may or may not be aware of. What do I mean by a Viksit Bharat? I look at three pillars of a Viksit Bharat. First and foremost, we should be a prosperous society. Secondly, we should have economic sovereignty so that we are immune, or at least not as vulnerable as we are today, to political and economic shocks. And thirdly, we should, and we're already on that journey, as all of you know, as the millennials here, we are already on a journey from becoming a data-rich nation, from being a data-poor nation. And the third pillar of a Viksit Bharat will be a nation which is driven by data. And I think we are well headed in that direction. What do I mean by a prosperous society? Three things. Firstly, a per capita income of in the range of $20,000 by 2047. A Gini coefficient, we are today, as I mentioned, at 29.4. A Gini coefficient below 20. Number two, a $20,000 per capita income will put us in the World Bank's definition of high-income countries. And I think it's extremely doable by the year 2047. If you look at poverty, the World Bank has an indicator showing how many people live between $1.9 and $3.2 per day. And that number should come down to zero or close to zero by 2047. Now, I will come to the challenges in the later part of my lecture, but I'll mention one here. For per capita income to take off, if you look around the world, domestic credit to GDP has to go up. There is a direct correlation between domestic credit to GDP going up and per capita income going up. We are today at 55%. We can comfortably go up to about 130%. For reasons best known to all of you, our bankers are reluctant to lend, thanks to what happened to many bankers who gave the wrong kind of loans. So unless our domestic credit to GDP goes up, the numbers I spoke to you about India becoming a prosperous Bharat is unlikely to happen. Another example, when this government came to power in 2014, I don't know how many of you are aware, India's tax-paying number of people, taxpayers. Today, we have 80 million taxpayers. In a country of 1 billion adults, we have only 80 million taxpayers. And 7 years ago, that number was about 12 to 15 million. With a tax to GDP ratio of 14 to 15% where we stand today, US is at 45%. Please think, as students of public policy, how do you expect government to deliver world-class services if the tax to GDP ratio remains where it is? That's something I want you all to think about. Let's look at another data point. If you look at MSMEs, many people don't talk about MSMEs. We have 65 million MSMEs, which contribute about 30% of our GDP. Okay? They have a credit gap of $400 billion. Their credit needs are close to $1 trillion. $1 trillion is the credit need of MSMEs, but the credit gap is $400 billion. And many of them pay anywhere between, hold your breath, 1% per day. That's 300% per annum as interest for working capital. It varies between 24% to 300%. And the next big challenge for government and the private sector using the India stack is to reach this population which needs credit urgently. We have 500 million blue-collar workers in India. Of the 500 million, 300 million are in non-farm occupations. 200 million are in farm occupations. 92% of them do not have access to formal credit. The reason I'm telling you all this is, imagine once the credit gap is fixed. I spoke about domestic credit to GDP being as one of the important factors taking us to a Viksit Bharat. Once the credit gap is fixed, which is what this government is working hard on, we will be well on our way to a Viksit Bharat. This is one of the main reasons. Uh, Infrastructure. My dear friend and batchmate from the IAS, Ashwini Vaishnav, one of the best appointments made by Prime Minister Modi, handles 3 major ministries: railways, telecom, and IT, and posts 4 ministries. And in a short span of he's been there hardly a year and a half, and see the amazing transformation he's brought about. India carries 8 billion passengers and runs per annum and runs 22,000 trains a day. The railway budget today, one of the first things Prime Minister Modi did when he took charge was to merge the railway budget and the general budget. This year, the railway budget is 2.5 lakh crores. It's highest ever. And India, thanks to the Atmanirbhar vision being given by the Prime Minister, is moving in the direction of creating technology like Kavach. I don't know how many of you saw Kavach, where Ashwini was in an engine and it was going at full speed towards another rail on the same track, and the train stopped 400 meters from each other. Now, the gold standard for railway protection is called, I think it's called European Standard 2. Kavach, indigenously developed by youngsters like you, is at European Standard 3. And now many countries have come forward wanting to take this technology and use it elsewhere. That's a huge testimony to where India is headed. Remember, railways is globally a sunset industry. Globally, railways, if you go to the United States, railways is a means of leisure travel. You want to take a week off, travel in a luxury train. But in India, it is a sunrise industry. And I think one of the biggest, I would say, successes of this government is its very fast implementation of passenger comfort, the Vande Bharat trains, the bullet train which is coming up. And I think railways will become indeed the lifeblood, even a bigger lifeblood than what it is today. I don't know how many of you have heard of Gati Shakti, entirely indigenously developed in Ahmedabad by the Geospatial Agency of the government of Gujarat. I'll give you one data point which will tell you about the power of Gati Shakti. In July 2021, after this government took charge, in July 2021, to get permission for setting up cell phone towers would take on an average 236 days. After this government came, 236 days, that was the legacy they had. Today, thanks to the implementation of Gati Shakti, you get a permission in 7 days. And in 80-85% of these cases, you get the permission instantly. You put your application in and the system gives you a response immediately. No wonder that India has today the fastest rollout of 5G in the world. India is already hitting 300 cities with 5G, which I think is a huge step forward, given that we launched only 6 months ago. As he mentioned, I was in the US last year, and 5G in US, even in the Bay Area, is very, very patchy. It works in some places, doesn't work everywhere. So compare always with where the developed world is, where we are and where we are headed. And I think it's a significant achievement. India's CapEx, there's a paper by Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy of the Rajiv Gandhi University in Bangalore, which shows the multipliers for welfare transfers, for revenue expenditure and infrastructure expenditure. Infrastructure expenditure has the highest multiple in terms of its impact. And this government, when it took charge, was spending 2 lakh crores on capex. 2014, not very far away. 8 years later, we are now spending 10 lakh crores on capex. And that is the multiplier effect you see happening on the ground. EPFO, those of you who like to follow jobs, I'm not an expert on it, but EPFO additions, which shows the net employment getting added, is about 15 lakhs per month now. Pre-COVID, it was at about 6 lakhs a month, or during COVID. Now we are at 15 lakhs new jobs being created every month. So let me stop at this point about infrastructure, roads. I can talk about energy and road infrastructure. We are now building about 37 to 40 kilometers a day. In 2014, we were doing 12 kilometers a day. Think of it, this is data. You can verify this data. I can tell you the sources if you want. The government has come up with a national infrastructure pipeline, which is 1.5 trillion over the next 5 years. It's come up with an asset monetization program. Government has a lot of valuable land, especially which is now getting monetized. You've seen the Deepam ministry going forward with privatization, which is extremely complicated in India, and yet they have succeeded in privatizing Air India. And now they're going forward with other assets as well. If I'd like to point to two financial metrics before I move to my favorite topic, which is digital public infrastructure, digital and technology, coming as I do from Bangalore, which is the Silicon Valley, not just of India, not just of Asia, and I'll tell you why we are the Silicon Valley of the world in just a moment. If you look at financial savings as a percentage of wealth, India is at 16%, US is at 70%. We have a huge headroom to grow. And all that is part of the flywheel picking up. If you look at stock market participation, we are at 3%. US is at 55%. People celebrate when we cross a demat account number. Today, our demat account is at about 60, 70 million. Demat account is in the country of 1 billion people. What I would like you to think about is, if we have 60 million demat accounts with a stock market participation of 5%, what will happen when the demat account starts hitting 400, 500 million? Won't our stock markets be always perpetually on fire, creating wealth for you and me who like to invest in the market? Let me move forward to India Stack. Now, you all know what India Stack is. I'm not going to spend time telling you about it. But I'd like you to know two broad things. One is the evolution of the internet economy. If you look at the US, the evolution of India, US, China, and Europe has been completely different. US, the internet economy was controlled by big tech, ad tech. You and I became data. Our data was sold to advertisers, and we got a lot of valuable services free. All those who criticize Google, and today there's a Google, Indian Association which has taken Google to court. Please think about it. Can you guys in this room think of life without Maps, life without YouTube, life without Gmail, life without Google Pay? We all don't value what we get free. And all these are free because there's an ad tech behemoth called Google, which is providing it to us free. There may be problems with Google. There may be problems with the monopoly on Android. I'm not talking about that. I'm asking you to think of how the evolution of the internet ecosystem happened. Look at Europe. Europe's evolution was completely different. It was regulation driven, which put citizens first, which is why, other than Spotify, I am not aware, and please educate me if I'm wrong, I am not aware of too many unicorns which have come out of Europe. Maybe there are one or two more. All the unicorns came out of an ad tech driven United States, where the entrepreneurship of the Silicon Valley made it happen, and India and China. China is a walled garden, which has led to a few large government-controlled companies like Alibaba, Tencent, who dominate their economy. And then there's the Indian way, which is a bit of the best of all three or four. And I think that is what is now getting rolled out by the government, by MeitY, under Ashwini's leadership. DPI is a bit of a mix of public provision of public infrastructure, because government is involved, private provisioning of public infrastructure, and private provisioning of private infrastructure. DPI, or digital public infrastructure, is a mix of these three. Nowhere else in the world do we have this. And what are the unique characteristics of it? DPI is completely free for citizens, and an assurance has been given by various ministers it will remain free. It is largely free for corporates. It's mostly free. There are some corporates who end up paying something for it. Thirdly, it is entirely built on an open architecture. The code is there on GitHub, and it is AI driven. Fourthly, it's like various Lego blocks being put together. Now, you have account aggregator and Ocean coming, which will democratize credit. That is what will take up our domestic credit to GDP ratio up from 55%. Think of it, how beautifully the India Stack architecture, which no one has, by the way, and different world leaders have come to Prime Minister Modi and have asked him, can this be shared with us? And the Prime Minister has agreed to share the architecture of India Stack with the G8 and G20 nations. Think of it, what a tribute it is to the Indian mind and the Indian leadership, that you have world leaders coming to India and asking us, how did you do this piece of tech? Think about it. When I was in the Bay Area, everywhere you used to enter a restaurant, you would be asked to produce a vaccine card. My host from Stanford would go and produce a cardboard paper in the Bay Area, not in some random city in America. And I would take out my phone and show a QR coded, digitally signed vaccination certificate. And they'd be astonished. How did we get this? Again, the COVIN, the ecosystem of delivering 2.2 billion vaccines, happened largely because of India Stack. These are all things which you should know and be very, very proud of. The most important thing about India Stack, our elections happen every 5 years. Potentially, there's a change of government every 5 years. But digital public infrastructure outlasts that 5 years. Aadhaar started in 2009 and touched 1.3 billion population after about 10, 12 years. So this goes past various election cycles, and you need a strong and decisive government to take it forward in order to ensure accountability. The India Stack, as I see it, provides the guardrails of accountability for the citizens on our political and permanent executive. And that has been made possible across multiple election cycles, across multiple governments of different political configurations. Look at GST. India had, 30 jurisdictions, 20 different kinds of tax rates, and each business had to file multiple forms across states. Now we are down to one nation, 4 taxes. And it's again a marvel, considering it happened due to a consensus between political leaderships belonging to multiple different parties, not just the BJP. I think that's a tremendous sign of the maturity of our political ecosystem in that case, where they were able to come together and legislate on a GST, which was so important to us. Okay, now let me come to some, you know about IT services, the quantum of IT services. I'm not going to go into all that. If you want, I can take it up in the question and answer session. Let me tell you some interesting nuggets which you may not be aware of. How many of you are James Bond fans in this room? How many of you saw Skyfall? There are more hands which went up when I say Skyfall than James Bond fans. What is Skyfall? Can someone tell me? All of you saw Skyfall. What is Skyfall? It's his house. That's right. Where is that house? The house in the movie is in Scotland. The house was built by a bunch of 20 youngsters in a studio in Whitefield, Bangalore, in a lab funded by the government of Karnataka. If you go to the end of the credits, you will see the name Motion Picture Company. Motion Picture Company created Skyfall. And I don't have the video, but when I come next time, I have the wireframe showing how it got done. And it's absolutely mind-blowing. Today, India and Bangalore are slowly becoming the animation, gaming, and special effects capital of the world. Please, I urge you to go and see the end credits, which we often walk out in a movie on. See the end credits. Almost every movie, Life of Pi, Star Wars, Jungle Book, every one of them, the tiger in Life of Pi, was created in the same studio in Bangalore. All of them are slowly migrating towards Bangalore. Why did I say Bangalore is not just the Silicon Valley of India or Asia, but the Silicon Valley of the world? Just last year, with 2.2 million IT knowledge professionals, Bangalore overtook the Silicon Valley to become the single largest collection of IT professionals on the planet. That, I think, is a huge achievement. There are 5 to 6 million IT professionals in the country, out of which 2.2 million are in Bangalore alone. There are 1,500 global captives, which produce a revenue of about 40 billion every year. Much of them is located in Bangalore, and there are about 1.4 million who work in the captive industry alone. How many of you have you gone and lost money at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas while gambling? Well, these are people who are shy. They're not putting. I know Raj has gone and lost and won a lot of money there. Caesar's Palace. Again, I have the live video. I'll show it when I come next time. The earpiece in the ear of the dealer and the live stream comes into companies in Bangalore to see if anybody is cheating. The camera feed comes there. They apply analytics on that camera feed. And if they find somebody is cheating, it is fed back instantly to the earpiece of the dealer so that he can stop the game. Think about it. These are all remarkable things. 20 years ago, could you have thought that this could happen in India? Let me give you another example. Today, out of the Fortune 500 companies, 400 either make or buy or outsource or develop in Bangalore. 400 of the Fortune 500 companies. How many cities in the world can boast of that? 400 of the Fortune 500. I am not sure even the Silicon Valley or San Francisco has that number. So again, something which we all as Indians should be proud of. We annually lease out 15 million square feet of grade A office space to all these companies, which is again a sign of where the Indian tech space is headed. I'll give you another nugget which you may or may not be aware of. Recently, Satya Nadella came to India. And when he was here, he was shown a demo by the government of India of ChatGPT in government. Think of it. When was ChatGPT released? Does any of you know? All of you who are using it to do your homework, please tell me, when was ChatGPT released? November 29th last year. Satya came here in January. What is a miracle is not the fact that a farmer was able to speak in Hindi through ChatGPT to a government portal seeking how to get PM Kisan. PM Kisan is a 6,000 rupee subsidy which is delivered to the accounts through press of a button by the Honorable Prime Minister. That is not the miracle here. The farmer spoke to ChatGPT in Hindi and the system took him to the website from where he was able to apply for it. That's not the miracle. The miracle was ChatGPT got released in November, end of November in the Bay Area. By January, we had it in India. We had Indian government adapt it, train it on Indian government policy documents, and make it work in a demo. Now just think about it. If ChatGPT can do this, now ChatGPT 4 is around the corner, Bard of Google is around the corner, what will all that do to governance in India? And I think that is another seminal moment which you should think about. You all know about UPI, 300 million transactions a day, 8 billion in value a day, absolutely frictionless. And that is the next frontier when it comes to the account aggregator and the UPI framework coming together in order to deliver good governance. You know, it's very natural for people to use the word bureaucracy in a very pejorative way. They all think that all IAS officers are making money. No IAS officer is doing an honest day's job. We have many of those, by the way. I'm not denying it. But all this I told you about is also the product and the outcome of the effort of a bunch of officers, both from the IAS and from the other services. We often don't see that. The media looks for stories which tells you man bites dog. They're not telling you the stories they don't want you to hear. They're looking for the TRPs. Look at the policy changes which have happened, and I'm going to tell you only the last 7 or 8 years. GST, 30 jurisdictions, 20 tax rates, 31 filings per business, now down to 1 plus 4. That is the cost of doing business. Ease of doing business, which is the next big thing this government and this Prime Minister are working on, is happening thanks to India Stack and DPI. DBT, direct benefit transfer. The former Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi spoke about how of 1 rupee, 85 paisa is what reaches. Today, we have 300 plus government schemes under the direct benefit program. 30 trillion gets transferred. 30 trillion rupees under 300 government programs. And government has weeded out over 10 lakh fakes and duplicates. And this is an ongoing process. Every month, these numbers improve. Again, being done by a bunch of officers. PLI program, 34 billion across 14 sectors in 5 years. India was nowhere in mobile phone production 10 years ago. The mobile phone production out of India was $2.3 billion in terms of revenue. Today, we are at $34 billion. $34 billion worth of mobile phones get produced. The largest mobile phone manufacturing factory on the planet. Noida, by Samsung. Think of it. These are all things which you need to think. And again, why am I saying all these data, linking it to government? Because there is a silent government officer working there which has made all this possible. It's not as if Samsung came out of nowhere. Look at Foxconn. Foxconn is now investing in a bunch of states. Karnataka, they are partnering in Tamil Nadu. They're probably going to go to, Vedanta is there in Gujarat. The semiconductor ecosystem is slowly shifting towards India. All these are huge achievements, would not have been possible but for the political leadership and the permanent leadership coming together to make this happen. Our share in global electronics production in 2012 was 1.5%. Today we are close to 5.5% and growing every single month. We are producing electronics today worth almost $100 billion. And imagine the impact the PLI scheme will have on our import bill and with it on our current account deficit once we start building most of our electronics in-house. The Startup India program, I'm sure all of you are familiar with. Fiscal transparency, it was the highlight of the past government that we would borrow under the table. It would not be transparent. For the first time in the last 3 years ago in the union budget, everything was disclosed. Those of you who like reading the budget document, there was an annex which showed what were the off-balance sheet borrowings, and all that was consolidated back into the government's budget. All this makes for good, clean fiscal policies and a transparent administration. And I don't know how many are aware of the Pragati program, where the Prime Minister himself monitors the implementation of large projects across the country with the state government, which is again a step forward. Now, what are the things which can go wrong? Let me come to the last part of my speech. Things which can go wrong. If the Ukraine war continues, or if we have a deep global recession, which seems to be on the anvil, then it will hit India's exports adversely. I spoke of the subsidies bill of 9 lakh crores, which is about 3.5% of our GDP. If that doesn't come down and doesn't get rationalized, at least in part, over a period of say 5 years or 10 years, we will likely face pressures on the fiscal maths in India with all the concomitant challenges which come with it. Luckily, we have not had too much. We've had some fiscal populism. We've had some adventurism, free electricity, in the Delhi government, everything is given away free. Punjab is now starting to do it. People want to go back to the old pension scheme in several state governments, which will be a fiscal disaster. All that, luckily, at the national level, is kept in a tight leash and tight check. But if we become fiscally populist, that's going to have its own consequences. We have CPC, as I call it, China, Pakistan, and COVID. Those are threats, external, exogenous, potential threats to India. If there are major policy mistakes again made, like was made in the past, so far we have not made major policy mistakes. But if we do make them, that again can potentially take a toll. Corruption at the wholesale level has gone down significantly. At retail level, there is corruption. And that can only be solved by more technology being put so that discretion at the hands of the civil servant at the last mile is taken away. And I think this government is working hard towards that. There are regulatory risks. There are risks that Atmanirbhar means we become completely autarkic and cut off from the world. These are, as I see it, some of the major risks that India faces. But overall, every country faces risks. Keeping the trajectory we are on, keeping the ecosystem we have, keeping the overall actors and leadership we have at different levels, I think we are all well set and on a good path. I'd like to leave you with 6 questions, which you as students, I'd love for you to think about. I don't have answers for all of them, but these are questions which I want all younger minds to think about. First and foremost, we are often told, all of you I'm sure are on Twitter and Facebook, during COVID, everyone held up the New Zealand Prime Minister as a shining example of leadership. I would like you to think can the policies of small and declining population countries be applied to a country of India's complexity and size? I think you need to think about. I'm sure New Zealand has done several things very right. But can its policies be wholesale imported into India? Question one. Question two, I asked you this earlier, with the tax to GDP ratio of 15% and with only about 80 million citizens out of 1 billion adults paying taxes, can we afford to provide the healthcare which Scandinavia does? Can we afford to have the highways which China has? Can we afford to have some of the superb labs and research institutions that the United States has? We need to think about it. I'm not sure the answer is a yes. Thirdly, should there remain a public option? Think about it today. What is exclusively in the sphere of government? I would like you to think and reflect about this. What remains exclusively in the sphere of government? I can take it up in the Q&A. And the counterfactual to that, should there be a public option at all, be it in telecom, be it in airlines? Should we have a public option? Should we not have a public option? Data. Many friends, there's a lot of debate online saying that government is a big brother monitoring us. Why should government be collecting our data? Why should Umang have our data? Why should India Stack have our data? Okay. Tatas today have 800 data points on every one of you. Are you okay with that? Facebook and Google they know everything about you. Are you okay with that? You need to think, who do you want as the custodian of your data? Your own elected government with all its faults? Or do you want a private player to have that data? Again, something you should think about. And lastly, I want to leave you with one thought. I believe progress itself is not progressing anymore. Why do I say this? If you look at the New York subway, I don't know how many of you have used it, it's one of the most marvelous transport systems in the world. The New York subway, the contract was given out in 1900, on 21st February. By 1904, it had 28 stations built. The same New York subway, I think it was called the 4th Avenue subway, the contract was given in 2000. And by 2017, a period of 17 years, same New York subway, only 3 stations got built. 1900 to 1904, 28 stations. 2000 to 2017, 3 stations. Let me give you another example, the Alaska Highway. The Alaskan Highway was built in 234 days in the year 1940 at the cost of $793 per mile. Compare that with San Francisco's Van Ness bus lane, not a highway, Van Ness bus lane, 1 lane. That 1 lane was proposed in the year 2001 and construction got completed in 2022. 21 years at the cost of $110,000 per mile. Technology has decisively improved in the last 100 years. Construction efficiency has presumably improved. Our ability to monitor projects using various tools has obviously improved. You have a lot of automation, mechanization. Why then, ladies and gentlemen, is progress not progressing? Thank you very much for your time and thoughts. I'm grateful. I'm happy to take any questions. Thanks a lot.